Oh, well, I see you're back for your regular dose of Bookworm content. Our trek down this seemingly endless road continues from where we left off. Rosemine had gathered not just her winter ingredient, but her spring one too, advanced printing by a few hundred years, flipped noble customs on their head, and witnessed the culmination of her dealings with Haas. So what does this upcoming volume have for us? Well, quite a bit. Rosemine researching paper, reinventing fashion, extreme mountain climbing, and dealing with her extended family. Last volume was playing catch up, but this one's pure payoff, while setting the stage for the upcoming climax. Before we get too deep though, why don't you go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you can stay up to date on my content. With that out of the way though, let's go ahead and dig into volume 4. The prologue picks up with Thule's perspective. She's out shopping for new clothes with Effa and Lutz for her upcoming switch to Karina's workshop. She's also about to turn 10, meaning a few things. One, her current contract is up at her workshop, so she's free to find a new place. But this also marks a cultural milestone for her. Yeah, she can now wear longer skirts down to her shins, since she's more than a child, but not quite a full-fledged adult. So that's why they're out shopping. Lutz busts out Mine's old guild card to pay for all the stuff, since she left pretty much all of her old savings to her family to cover these sort of expenses. And Lutz mentions that she's been stealthily adding to it still as Rosemine. But clothes aren't the only goal here, as they swing through a few other places to buy some more stuff. Since Thule's going to be signing a Lahero contract, she's going to be living at the Gilberta company, meaning she'll be tied to the store just like Lutz. Yeah, she can't leave, even if she wants to at that point. So she'll need cutlery, stuff to wash her clothes, sleep in, stationery, that sort of stuff. But hey, at least she'll have an ally there in Lutz. Or not. They have to keep this bit on the down low. So when they get to the southern end of the city, Lutz tells them that Benno, Mark, and he are going to be splitting off from the Gilberta company. The reason being is Benno spread too much into industries outside his purview, to the point that all these noble customers he's getting don't realize that the Gilberta company is a clothing store primarily, which is messing with their core business, pissing off Karina, and also every other large store owner who feels like Benno is soaking up all the industries Rosemine is launching. Benno's also doing this so that he can follow Rosemine if she's married off into another duchy, since she's the biggest customer of their books and paper products. That makes Thule rethink everything, since she didn't necessarily want to work for Karina. That's a perk, not the goal. She wants to make Rosemine's clothes and become a top seamstress. So maybe a Lahero contract isn't what's right for her. So now she's torn on what to do. Everyone there advises her to talk this out with Karina. That way they can get her future sorted. Over to Rosemine now. It's time for the draping process, where they rough out the shape of the dress with cheap cloth before working with more expensive stuff. Bridget, Monica, Karina, Thule, and the other seamstresses are all in the hidden room, where we learn that noble women basically wear tight bodysuits that are fairly tough made of face stones. So this is sort of a letdown, since that means sexy underwear won't sell among nobles, even though Rosemine's thinking a lingerie revolution is in order. Putting that aside though, she decides to go talk business with Benno outside while they're working, with Monica signaling for them when they're ready. So she steps outside and Benno tells her that he's made so many noble connections because of her, but the undertone is he's busy as hell and it's all her fault. Since it's just Benno, Fran, and Daniel there, she tells him to cut the crap and lay it out straight. She thinks she's been loading too much work on the Gilberta company and asks if he wants it distributed elsewhere. He just tells her not to be stupid. That would just be a repeat of the Ingo issue from last volume. So after Fran reins in their conversation, they go back to the noble way of talking and decide to keep loading work onto Benno, because he won't give it up without a fight anyway. Next is Zilgner, and she wants Mark, Lutz, Gil, and some Grey Robes to go research paper. But Benno can't really spare people right now, because all of the reasons we learned about in the prologue, but Rosemine's not privy to those just yet. Otto, who's going to be Benno's replacement, isn't up to snuff on handling nobles, so Benno can't give Mark up for this trip. He asks if Fran can maybe train Otto, and it just so happens that the Archduke Conference is coming up soon. Zom's being transferred in the near future, and Fran's gonna have some time on his hands with Rosemine out of the temple for a while. So with that settled, when Otto's prepared, Benno will send Mark and Lutz to Ilgner, and has Lutz and Gil give an important report to Rosemine to end the meeting on. Turns out the printing press is finished and assembled in the workshop awaiting a trial run, so she decides to get the Knight's Tale she's been compiling together. It'll be the perfect test since it's so damn text heavy, though she's planning on doing some illustrations that resemble Ferdinand as a marketing move, with her ace in the hole that this is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to people living or dead is a pure coincidence. Don't you love loopholes? Now that she's hyped, she's gonna teach them firsthand. That's not right, but Lutz backs her up, saying they can clear out anyone who isn't privy to Rosemine's past. That way she can do the demonstration to Lutz and Gil. Just then the face stone lights up on the door and she needs to go check on the dress. She heads in, makes some minor changes for Karina, and asks Bridget how it feels. She says she likes how easy it is to move in case she needs to fight. Apparently that's all knights ever think about is the possibility of confrontation. Well, except Daniel. He only thinks about getting married. He's basically a lame version of Otto who couldn't secure himself a hot seamstress wife. Rosemine asks if she can let Daniel in to see. That way they have a pair of male eyes so she's not dressing Bridget in something abnormal by this world's standards. You know, stuck in a room full of people too polite to say so. And when he sees, Daniel.exe shuts down. Oh, and when he reboots, his OS got a romantic interest update. Isn't that fancy? His flustered reaction and confirmation she looks nice seals the deal, and the dress is a go. After Daniel leaves, she probes Bridget, and while she thinks he'd be a good husband for various reasons, mostly relating to how it benefits Ilgner, the mana difference is just too great, and flat out refuses the idea. Poor Daniel. So Rosemine silently cheers him on, since her blessing made his mana keep growing. A few days later, after she's compiled a manuscript of the night stories, we're back to printing. Rosemine sorts out who will observe the trial run of the new press. They don't have to wait for illustrations like with the picture books, and she sends Gil to inform Lutz on the day they're to print. She meets with Wilma to get some illustrations started, and tells her to use Ferdinand as a base, with her surefire technique of claiming the likeness as a coincidence. Wilma loves that idea, and they're now in this mess together. On the day of the actual trial run, she needs to wear some throwaway clothes. That way she can get them dirty, but her archnoble or high bishop's robes just won't do. Fran has a solution to her problem though, since she normally wouldn't own such clothes being the Archduke's daughter. But back when she was an apprentice shrine maiden, she had plenty. They go down to the orphanage director's chambers, and sure enough, there's clothes still there, despite assuming they'd be thrown out. She throws on her old Gilberta company outfit and heads on down to surprise Lutz. When he sees her, he even slips up and accidentally calls her mine, but quickly corrects himself. It's a nice moment to show the connection these two share. With that pass though, they get to printing, and it's super tedious where Rosemine gets tired by the end. But when all's said and done, a successful page is cranked out, showing it works. Now that she's walked Gil and Lutz through the process, she's thoroughly satisfied about doing it herself. So now it's time for a public trial run, where Lutz performs it in front of the craftsmen in gray robes so they can all see. Everyone's impressed. Rosemine immediately places an order for another one in Haas, making Johan and Ingo sweat, as they did all the labor here. But Zach is less pleased, since he won't have as much work to do as them. This leads to Rosemine's dilemma, since she can't really decide between their two workshops for her exclusive business, with Johan's technical abilities and Zach's creativity. So she throws out the idea of making Zach a foreman of his own workshop, while Johan goes to work for him. But that's crazy in their eyes, since Johan and Zach are both Laherls. They're tied to their workshops already, and can't exactly break their contracts. Plus Zach would need his Borough certification, which he doesn't have yet. Now, she's the daughter of the Archduke, so she could probably force this through if she really wanted to. But luckily that idea never crosses her mind because it would cause too many problems to count. Zach and Johan are very profitable for their current workshops, so taking them away and forcing a Baruch certification would ostracize them in their industry. It would also basically tie them exclusively to Rosemine. So good thing they put the brakes on this. I'd also like to point out that her explaining herself here is thanks to Ferdinand. His lessons are paying off. Ingo explains the details to Rosemine, so she understands that making a new workshop for her Gutenbergs is out of the question. So instead, she just offers to commission more schematics from Zach. Firstly, for a hand pump to make drawing water from wells easier. She can go ahead and use this as a trial run to introduce copyright into this world, with a fee going to herself as the inventor, Zach as the designer, and registering the schematics with the Smith skill for any workshop to build one as long as a fee is paid to them, thus generating passive income. She explains the use of pumps and basically introduces the idea of a vacuum into this world for the purposes of drawing water. That gets Zach pumped to design it, so he gets cracking on the new plans. After the printing and pump discussion, Lutz passes a letter from Benno to Rosemine about Hugo wanting to become a court chef. So she sets up a meeting for a few days later, prepares some special sweets from Ella to throw in Hugo's face, and they get started discussing the situation. Remember, Hugo was dumped by his girlfriend in the lower city, his whole reason for turning down Sylvester originally, and now he wants to go back. He has a replacement lined up at the Italian restaurant already, and he wants Rosemine to recommend him to Sylvester for another invite. She's not entirely convinced though, because Hugo's talents would be wasted in the court. It's a system built on nepotism behind the scenes. We learned about that from Lise's side story back in part 1. That's why she left to go join Gustav. Rosemine explains to Hugo that he won't be a teacher this go around, and would be starting from the bottom rung, with little hope of advancing. And to top it off, her recipes are blocked behind a magic contract, so all that knowledge that gave him an edge would literally be worthless. Then there's the fact he won't ever be able to leave the Nobles' Quarter again after this, but he's pretty determined. However, if you think back to last volume's prologue, Rosemine's in the market for a new chef, and Hugo is literally just what she's looking for. So she offers him an alternative of being her personal chef again, which is basically the same as a court chef from the lower city's perspective. Everything he's looking for by working for Sylvester would basically be granted here, with the added perk of being able to return to the lower city. And what finally tips the scale is Rosemine has cute girls in her kitchen, whereas the castle is a sausage fest. So with that, she has herself a new chef in Hugo. With just Benno and Rosemine left in the meeting, she informs him that she'll be heading to the castle while Sylvester's away at the Archduke conference, meaning Fran will be at the temple without much to do and able to train Otto, which is good, but he has more to say in private. They go to the hidden room and lay out a few things. They're splitting from the Gilberta company for the previously mentioned in Thule's prologue reasons, and Benno wants her to think up a name for his new business. Gilberta was thought up by a noble previously, and the first owner took that as his name as well. You know, I really love the one line in this scene where Rosemine asks Benno if he's gonna change his name to Rosemine too. I tinge a lot of the narration and presentation of these in my own sense of humor because, honestly, I find that entertaining, so I don't really draw attention to how funny these books are. It's one of the underappreciated aspects of these books, and another reason why you should be reading these and not using my videos as a substitution for the source material. Gutenberg would be confusing and piss Benno off, so she takes another inspiration from our world's printing history and goes with Plantin. Despite him not changing his name, we're introduced to the Plantin Company officially, with Benno, Mark, and Lutz. Not to mention a ton of skilled Lahanges coming from other stores to get involved in the new paper and printing industries. Hooray! Now it's time to head to the castle, and immediately Rosemine and Ferdinand are taken to Sylvester's office. Inside, the whole damn family's there, with Lamprecht and Eckhart stepping outside to guard the door, and Cornelius and one of Florencia's guards taking the inside. Now Rosemine's nervous, but Ferdinand explains she's gonna pour mana into the foundation while Sylvester's away. This is part of her duty as a member of the archducal family, and only archnobles with a close blood connection to the family are permitted to serve at the moment. Under a tapestry behind Sylvester's desk is a small door with some face stones surrounding it. Sylvester has Wilfried and Rosemine register their mana, and now they can go inside. It stretches to allow everyone to enter, and the room inside is pure white, with a really complex magic tool at its center, a giant face stone floating in a boatload of magic circles. Rosemine's pretty impressed, but as cool as this is, it's not the actual foundation. It's merely a magic tool for interacting with it. The actual foundation magic is elsewhere only Sylvester knows and can enter. Speaking of who can enter, only Sylvester, Florencia, Wilfried, Rosemine, Ferdinand, and Bonifacius, as the son of the Archduke 2 generations ago, and technically an Archduke candidate still, despite him being retired, can enter this room. Yeah, he didn't want the seat in the first place, and would only ever take it if every other candidate was dead most likely, especially given his age. But the purpose of their trip here today is to show Wilfried and Rosemine how to replenish mana. Rosemine's used to it, of course, which surprises Sylvester, as he assumed she'd be the first one to drop given her health. But when he asks Ferdinand just how hard he's pushing her during the dedication ritual, Ferdinand claps back, saying Sylvester's the one loading extra chalices on them while he's providing potions. Wilfried isn't so lucky though. It's physically draining for him, and he's not even using his own mana. They're using face stones at the usual suspect's mana. Sylvester just leaves them there too, dumped off in the corner of a room, because what safer place is there than this, where only close family members can enter? After the replenishment, she heads off to her room, reads until dinner, and then at the meal, Ferdinand informs her of her coming schedule. She'll be staying at the castle until the end of spring, but she can't just read and make sure Riarda ensures that she's exercising as well. So with that settled, the Archduke conference is here, and they bid farewell. Wilfried says goodbye to Sylvester and Florencia, while Rosemine sees off Karstedt as Sylvester's guard knight. He informs her that Bonifacius will remain in the castle as the acting Archduke during the conference, and to ask him for help if she needs it, because he'd never refuse a request from his cute granddaughter. Bonifacius is the epitome of a doting grandfather, with the physical strength and grace of a bull in a china shop. It really makes him a lot of fun. But with the Archduke gone, Elvira turns to Rosemine and hints that she wants to talk. So Rosemine invites her over for a quick tea party. Turns out she called the Gilberta company over and just now learned about her new dress design. Taking cues from Ferdinand here, she's implying the "you should have told me" part, and asks Rosemine to see it so she can see what trends she's planning to popularize. Rosemine isn't planning all that. She only wanted to make an outfit that suited Bridget. She explains how the current fashion trend is exclusionary, and really just wants people to wear clothes they look good in. But that's not entirely right, because if she's not announcing this as a new trend, Bridget will look out of place and be considered weird. So they hash out a plan to show off the temporary stitching to her faction at a tea party, despite Rosemine initially telling Karina this wasn't a rush job. That sucks. So begins her life in the castle, where she wakes up, reads, eats, exercises at the knight's training ground where she does some calisthenics, lessons on history and geography, lunch, Haarspiel, sewing practice, because noblewomen still need to know how to sew, despite the purpose being entirely different from commoners. Then she reads some more, dinner, and then offers mana. So, pretty easy. Though Angelica comes back on Earth Day, and we learn that she's almost done with her supplementary lessons. This isn't a break though, as they grill her more on what she needs to know, using Eckhart's notes from school. Before long, it's time for the dress debut, and Rosemine meets Otto for the first time under her current name. She notes how much he resembles Fran in his actions, and gives him a proper greeting with a blessing to his shock. The plan here is to have Bridget greet everyone wearing her dress from the last Starbind. That way they can see the difference firsthand. They'll also be using this opportunity to introduce the Planting Company officially, and distinguish it from the Gilberta Company, so nobles know the Gilberta Company handles clothes, not paper goods. While Bridget gets changed into the new outfit, Benno brings out some books to sell to the nobles who didn't get a chance to buy some during winter. Even Elvira mentions how Cornelius has taken an interest in his studies, and also playing Gwenin with Karstedt more. But Rosemine realizes that's probably because he's helping Angelica, and he really just wants those recipes. One noblewoman notes the hair ornaments being sold as well, and Rosemine uses this opportunity to pop back into the changing room, where she has Karina chop off the flower portions of the hair ornaments and sew them onto the dress for something extra, since women are taking notice. She also takes this chance to apologize to Karina for the rushed job, but she waves it off, saying she and Benno predicted this would happen anyway, so they were prepared. She then hands Rosemine a letter from Benno, where he reiterates his age-old lesson from back in part 1. Remember way back when he kept telling her she needs to lay the groundwork before introducing things? Still relevant, but now the dress is ready and they show it off, getting feedback from noblewomen and encouraging them to wear clothes that suit them rather than copy this dress design. In the end, everything went off without a hitch. After the party, Angelica has passed her classes, and that means it's reward time. She gives a small gold coin to Daniel to pay back his brother, and gives Cornelius a recipe for Mont Blanc, with cream from a seasonal nut that he's fond of. And Angelica's getting her reward the next day at the training ground. Oh, this is gonna be a disaster. So the next day she heads to the training ground, with Daniel alone guarding her because the rest had to report early for training. He idly mentions how he envies her mana capacity, and she says her capacity is due to her compressing her mana so much when she was a commoner without magic tools before entering the temple. He apologizes for being so thoughtless after she suggests he tried doing the same, by removing all of his magic tools and skirting death repeatedly. When they get to the training grounds, Rosemine is already tired, because most of her exercise was just walking there, and she's gonna do some stretches and call it a day. However, Eckhart isn't there to supervise. Now you would think Daniel could do it, but he lacks the power to hold off the mana from the knights currently training. Yeah, it's basically an active firing range. So instead, Rosemine decides to pull Daniel aside and teach him her mana compression method to help him win Bridget's heart. Turns out hers is fairly different from the one taught in the academy. We learn later it's basically a suggestion and not a lesson. Kids aren't given a concrete method and are instead told to visualize what works best for them. Since nobles don't really do physical work, they tend to struggle with that part. Simmering potions is pretty much the best visualization they can get. She goes with a visual demonstration, like asking Daniel to put his cape in a box. He shoves it in poorly so it takes up a ton of room, but then Rosemine says to pull it out and fold it. And then he can imagine more capes fitting in the box like that. After that, she suggests putting the cape in a bag, and then she sits on it to squeeze even more air out. Daniel tries just the first step, and says that alone makes a huge difference. Imagine putting it all together. Putting that on the back burner for a while, like say the rest of the volume. Angelica comes in to collect her reward. Her guards gather and are excited to see this, because someone giving their mana is pretty damn rare. We get an explanation on a few aspects of mana in this scene, where people have certain elemental affinities and in their third year, they'll get divine protections. The number of affinities means it's easier to get protections from the assorted gods. Lay nobles tend to have a single affinity, med nobles like 2 or 3, arch nobles generally have 4 or more, and then they ask Rosemine, and she has no clue. But remember back to her noble baptism when her medal shone with all the different colors? That means she has every affinity, and hence why Ferdinand said as expected. Usually the priest performing the baptism is supposed to tell the noble child their affinities, but Ferdinand didn't explain it. She also doesn't really want to say because having all of them is kind of abnormal, so they try to figure out what she might have and list off the blessings she's given, and come up with about 4 for sure. What this has to do with the mana blade is Angelica has 2 affinities, and mana blades need not just more mana, but also different attributes to boost their effectiveness. Some Fae beasts have weaknesses to elements, so having your mana blade with as many elements as possible covers your ass. but it also isn't like absolutely necessary to have all of them. It just helps. Also, when offering, don't exceed the mana of the owner, or else you'll become the new owner. Good to keep that in mind. So when it comes time to offer her mana, Rosemine thinks about what Angelica lacks, and ultimately decides on a brain. She needs someone like Ferdinand yelling at her to remember crap. Enter Eckhart to put a stop to this. He asks her guard knights what they were thinking. This isn't something to do unless Ferdinand is present to observe. But it's too damn late. She's already put mana into it. So he calls Ferdinand over, and he shows up really pissed off. To the point he didn't even change out of his priest robes first. The reason they're all worried is Rosemine's mana is on a different level than a med noble. So who knows how the mana blade's gonna evolve with all that. And yes, mana blades can evolve. On top of that, she hasn't even been to the academy yet, so she doesn't know how to control mana besides pouring it into stuff. She can't select just specific elements or even judge quantity to pour in. As Ferdinand yells at her, he pours some of his mana in to test the waters, explaining why this was a dumb idea. But as the lecture goes on, we know Angelica isn't listening to all this, and Ferdinand picks up on it. He's about to call her a fool when suddenly Ferdinand's voice cuts him off. Yes, another voice that sounds exactly like him, and not coming from his mouth. It's coming from the mana blade. Since Rosemine was picturing Ferdinand here, she's obviously the one to blame. Or she would be, until the blade says that the mana Ferdinand poured in to test the waters was the other half of the equation to birth this monstrosity. Stenluke's one of the funniest running gags in this series, where Angelica keeps getting yelled at by her mana blade for not paying attention during serious situations. Also helps it's not run into the ground. Say hello to Stenluke, everybody. Angelica's lecture blade that's gonna remember things for her from now on. However, since it's a newborn, it doesn't innately know things. Yeah, it needs to be taught. So basically the plan is to get a head start on the 4th year's lessons, with Cornelius and Daniel using Eckhart's notes to teach Angelica's sword, since it'll actually remember things. During this, Rosemine wants to print more stuff, and asks Bridget if it would be a good idea to do so with Eckhart's and Ferdinand's notes from the academy. That way they can make some study guides. But Daniel looks troubled. Transcribing class notes for archnobles is how poorer lay and med nobles make money in the academy, so that would hurt a lot of lower income students. This is interrupted when they get a message from Ferdinand saying the planting company is requesting a meeting. So that Earth Day, they head back to the temple. Or rather the night before, so she'll be there for the meeting that day. She gets a report from Gil saying they finished the Winter Bible, meaning they now have a complete set of picture Bibles for the gods. They settle on printing the night stories individually so people can buy ones they want, and then that way they can also rebind them together. They also plan to use the mimeograph printing for other less text-heavy stuff, so they're thinking maybe sheet music. Earth Day comes and she asks Ferdinand what his opinion on printing the sheet music is, and he has none because it's not his music. She composed it, but he says he merely transcribed it for her. She's the one who thought it up. Basically, neither of them want the prestigious title of composer, and Rosemine comes up with a plan to slap Ferdinand's name on it bigger than hers. Also, she wants to print a recipe book, and he says put the sales off until winter. Back in her chamber, she asks Rosina to draw the music up, and even throws in a few others to make a decent book. Once she's done, she can pass it on off to Gil for mass production. Then she gets yelled at by Fran for not eating and to quit talking about printing. When it's time to meet the planting company in her hidden room, Oto is there too. She gives Lutz a book for Thule with Effa's stories in it since she's turning 10, and asks about how the transition to Karina's shop's treating her. Perfect timing, because that's what they wanted to talk about and why Oto's there. They explain her plight from the prologue, but Rosemine doesn't really get what the big deal is. Sure, everyone wants Thule at Karina's, but it's all for different reasons, and that's what really matters. Karina and Oto want her there to keep their connection to Rosemine, and with Benno and Lutz gone now, they've got a tenuous connection to her at best. But of course, Rosemine wants what's best for Thule, and ultimately it comes down to what sort of contract she should sign. After all, Oto and Karina won a Lahero contract for her, that way they can cement their connection. So to sate both parties here with Rosemine's possibility of leaving the duchy, she pitches the idea of franchising. That way if she is married off for political reasons, they can send Thule to the new duchy to open up a branch of the Gilberta company. That seems to work out, and Oto's gonna bring up the idea to Karina. On to Benno's business, he's ready to send Lutz to Ilgner, but not with Mark. They're sending Gustav's grandson, Frida's older brother Damien, instead. He's extremely capable both with handling nobles and business, so there won't be any problems. Benno wants to talk to Guy Bilgner. That's going to be easy enough since he'll be at the Starbine for Bridget's dress debut. The planting company is also going to be doing business there, selling the new Bible, sheet music, and night stories, so they can set up a meeting and hammer out most of the business dealings and plan for the trip. Lastly, they decide to charge a fortune for the limited run on Rosemine's ravishing recipes when it comes out in winter. And that's pretty much all the business. Back at the castle, it's about time for Rosemine to have a past mistake come back to bite her in the ass. She gets the call that Sylvester and Florencia are returning from the Archduke conference. When she goes to see them, Sylvester's in a pretty foul mood. He pokes her cheek with a dead expression until we finally get a callback, at which point he tells her it's all her fault, and to follow him into his office. Inside, he orders everyone out but Kartstedt, and faceplants onto his desk from exhaustion. Turns out she told his older sister about his uncle passing. Rosemine doesn't really have a clue about that though, and even in the context of this being related to the temple, she's at a loss. I mean, hell, she doesn't even know his older sister. She's only been mentioned in passing, like that she's married to Florencia's older brother. And that's mistake number 1. That's the younger of his older sisters. He has 2, and the eldest, Georgine, was the heir apparent until Sylvester was born. And when she wouldn't support her younger brother as the next Ob, she was shoved off to Arnsbach, outside Ehrenfest, and less likely to cause issues. So at the Archduke conference, she pestered Sylvester about Bezewanst and how cruel he was for not telling her. That says a lot. Like she's actually a horrible petty woman who shares a lot in common with her mom, meaning she holds grudges and will probably hate Rosemine when she finds out she's the reason Bezewanst is dead. Maybe that her mom's in prison too, but probably not. Oh, and also she's coming at the end of summer. Didn't I tell you how neat it was that this was gonna snowball? And the best part is, it's not even done. Not by a long shot. It started with Rosemine misunderstanding some letters as setup, turned into her kicking this into motion by informing this woman that Bezewanst died, and then it turns out that it's not his secret lover, but the niece he doted on. Also, she's a vindictive bitch who will probably ruin their lives out of spite. Wait until part 4, when the long haul of this plan finally gets into motion. That wasn't the only reason he called Rosemine over though. He wants Ferdinand to return to noble society, and Rosemine thinks that's a great idea if Sylvester's plan is to collapse the temple overnight, but that's not his intention. Ferdinand is a blue robe who helps out with scholar and knight's work right now. If he returns to noble society, Sylvester can order him to serve as the high priest in the same capacity that she's serving as the high bishop, meaning he'll be able to have his retainers again, as well as participate in politics. I think that's the real reason Sylvester wants him. He's been wanting to do this for a while, but his mother opposed it at every turn. It's been hinted at so far, but Veronica was so paranoid, she was plotting to kill Ferdinand to ensure he wouldn't kill Sylvester and take the seat of Ob for himself. Now that she's gone, it's a good time to bring his brother back to his side officially. Rosemine's opposing this on Ferdinand's behalf, mostly because she understands this means he's going to be overworked again. But ultimately it's his decision, and she decides to ask him. The next day, she pulls him into his hidden room and lays it out. Ferdinand thinks it's a pain Sylvester's worrying about this, but he believes it's probably for the best. Rosemine doesn't really buy that though, and asks him what he wants. Ferdinand lays out the merits of how it would benefit her, but again, she wants to know what he wants. It's a bit of a touching moment here when it finally hits Ferdinand what she's saying, but he says again that he'll be called to do work anyway, so entering noble society again will allow him to officially become her guardian, despite that sounding like a negative the more he thinks about it. So they agree. During the Starbind, Sylvester will announce his return. Ferdinand leaves the temple in Rosemine's hands for a few days with his blue robe helpers, filling in for the lower city Starbind. When they head to the noble quarter, Daniel goes to get dressed, while Bridget's had that entire day off to ensure she was ready for her dress debut. Before she heads to the hall for the ceremony, she sees Bridget first, and the dress is great. Elvira is watching over her through this process though, to ensure Bridget isn't getting fucked over and fielding any potential suitors. Inside for the Starbind, she sits next to Sylvester like she did last year. They notice Bridget, and Sylvester says she did a damn good job on the dress. He points out that this is basically announcing she has Rosemine's full support, so she's gonna get a ton of marriage proposals from those looking for connections to Rosemine. But Rosemine's already aware of that, and it's why Elvira is sticking to her like a hawk. Enter the man of the hour to join them, Ferdinand. We get an interesting conversation here, since Rosemine is wondering why Ferdinand isn't out there looking for a partner. He says it's pointless, since there's no single women in the whole duchy who have enough mana to be a match for him, at least among the unmarried women. But she recalls that Elvira told him that he's courted a woman before. Ferdinand corrects this, saying that he did, but it was another Archduke candidate from when he was in the academy. Even if they include married women, only one in the entire duchy is compatible with Ferdinand, which makes Rosemine wonder. Maybe it's Florencia. Oh good, time to clear up some misconceptions here. People look at this scene and grossly misunderstand it, assuming Rosemine and Ferdinand are mana matches. But they're not. At least probably not at this point, considering mana sensing is canonically stated to start happening during puberty, which means no one here can sense Rosemine's mana. Her body's not broadcasting it at this point. She's 8. If they could sense it, during the Trombe extermination, every single noble there would have known that Rosemine had a ton of mana. And they didn't. The demonstration Ferdinand set her up for wouldn't have been a shock to all these people. But also, and I don't really like using the fanbooks as authoritative statements because they're supplementary material, it's clarified that he's talking about Veronica as the married woman that he'd be compatible with. She has the blood of a Greater Duchy's Archduke candidate, so she's got a lot of mana.
Karsta adds fuel to the fire, suggesting Ferdinand marry Rosemine, since her mana should match his when she's older. But they're both grossed out by that. Not wanting to give in to all the Sylvester's teasing that follows that comment, Ferdinand tells Rosemine she'll meet plenty of high-mana people in the Royal Academy. Find the best partner she can while she's there. She takes that to mean to find the one with the most books because, you know, that's all she cares about. Sylvester butts in saying he doesn't want Ferdinand marrying her off without his permission. But this is where assigning him as a guardian backfires, because guardians are legally pretty much the same as parents in this world. Now it's time for the Starbind. Sylvester kicks it off, announcing Ferdinand's return and signing the marriage contracts. Rosemine's turn, where she blesses, and out she goes for bed. Just like that. The next day, she catches up with Elvira and learns what happened after she left. Bridget was of course the center of attention, and her previous fiancé she broke up with approached her, saying that he would mend her honor by marrying her again. But then Daniel jumped in to defend her honor, by publicly announcing that he wanted to marry her himself. But he doesn't need an answer until next year, as he's currently working to make his mana a match for hers. That's pretty damn romantic. Too bad Rosemine missed it. 2 days later, it's time for the book sale, and this time they're selling it to all the nobles, not just those with kids. Since more nobles are sticking around for it, Daniel and Bridget are the talk of the town. Now it's the common opinion that Daniel's a fucking idiot here, clinging to a doomed love between himself, a lay noble, and Bridget, a med noble. However, he's getting some attaboys for standing up to defend her honor. Bridget's even thankful for it, and Daniel's just happy to have another year to make it happen. And to cap this off, Rosemine has a lunch meeting with Guy Bilgner, not just to discuss printing, but so he can thank her for Bridget's dress. Ferdinand is now sitting in on these meetings because he's officially her guardian, meaning printing now sort of falls on his shoulders. Guy Bilgner informs her that his province is ready to receive her and her people, but Ferdinand points out to her that he's intending to use this visit to show off her backing and dissuade Bridget's former fiancé. Rosemine's aware of that and also fine with it. Researching paper is well worth that price. And that sort of shocks the Guy, that his province is being chosen for such a huge thing. Benno's called in to hammer out the details so they can get the contracts prepared before they even arrive to get them signed. And essentially, Ilgner's being taught to make paper for a ground floor investment. And that's definitely a big deal for their backwater land. The Planting Company and the Grey Robes will set out as soon as Ilgner can accommodate, and they're going to stay until the Harvest Festival. After their meeting, Rosemine goes to the sales room to oversee everything. And the sheet music and night stories are doing pretty damn well, mostly because they made some illustrations in the likeness of Ferdinand to show prospective buyers. However, they're not included, so I think they just skirted the line here. Elvira says it's a damn shame she can't sell more illustrations, and Rosemine emphasizes that there's nothing that she can do, letting the social savvy Elvira pick up on the implications and possibly asking her brother, Guy Baldenzel, if he'd be interested on getting in on the ground floor of his niece's business. In her hidden room, Rosemine gathers Gil and Lutz to have them prepare for Ilgner, pick the priests, clothes, and tableware, since priests aren't used to commoner life. She lets them know she'll pick them up after the Harvest Festival, so it'll be an extended stay. Lutz also mentions that Gustav and Frida wanted to meet her, and they'll be able to do so when they gather to leave for Ilgner, which Bridget sends off an ordinance to schedule the exact date. When it's time to leave, Frida talks to Rosemine for a bit. She's confused by her high beast being familiar with them from her visits to Henrik's estate, and also tells her to work her brother to the bone. But Damien pipes up that she's speaking too casual to Rosemine, and that she's not the same as she was when she visited their house in the lower city.
That's some foreshadowing right there. Won't be the last time Frida gets scolded for talking too casually to Rosemine. She's not terribly used to speaking to those of higher status than herself, despite visiting a lay noble quite frequently.
After that, they set off for Ilgner and arrive before long. We've already been told that Ilgner is quite a bit different from Ehrenfest, and that's very true. The commoners there are super excited to see Bridget back and talk to her like an old friend, even teasing her when she gets embarrassed. Rosemine doesn't mind, but Fran and Daniel are both pretty shocked by how casually she's speaking with commoners. In the summer mansion, Rosemine meets with Guy Bilgner for a quick greeting, where of course she's welcomed, but something isn't quite right. And that thing is Bridget in Rosemine's eyes. She's standing behind her all stiff, like a proper guard knight. What the fuck? So she tells her that she's on leave for this trip and to spend some time with her family. She's reluctant since, you know, that just leaves Daniel to guard her, but Rosemine says it's fine. Her family probably misses her. After the tea and greeting, she goes to get changed, and while that's happening, she has Fran go to set up a meeting with the Guy to sort out the contracts. and Fran returns with a troubled expression. Yeah, Guy Bilgner said, now was fine. Wait, what? Yeah, that's weird. Nobles schedule things like days out. What's going on here? However, since it's a slow province and they know each other's schedules already, plus the details are pretty much already set in stone, signing the contracts with Benno now makes sense and gets them on their way faster. So they do just that, with even Benno being surprised by how quick things are happening. That night there's a huge barbecue to welcome everybody, and Monica and Fran are serving Rosemine and Daniel respectively. The Grey Priests are at a loss since, you know, it's not like it is in the temple, so they don't really know how to eat at a buffet type of situation. She has Lutz go over and show the Grey Priest how it's done, and yeah, he's kind of annoyed by that, but understands that they have to eat with his help, or else they just won't eat. So he takes Kill, piles his plate high, and the older Grey Robes grab the exact same stuff and same amount. Next she looks to Fran and Monica, tells them to go eat too, but they won't stop serving. Yeah, it's improper for Rosemine to go get her own food, so she says to at least tell Hugo to set some aside for them so that way they won't starve. And even then, they still won't leave to go do that. Bridget's the one who steps up to go tell him. And that's when we see the nobles eating with the villagers and Ilgner. After she leaves and talks with the commoners on her way to Hugo, everyone sees just how comfortable she is there. Rosemine asks Daniel how he feels seeing the real Bridget. The woman we've known so far who's been so reserved? That was just a facade for work. The real Bridget is a fun-loving tomboy who's crazy family-focused. And Daniel's response is he's surprised, but he also thinks she's much prettier like this. The next day, they go to gather in the forest. Bridget leads the way, not as a guard, but as someone familiar with the woods. They ask an old man who's guiding them about the trees, and he mentions some fate plants that might work for paper. He mentions non-seb and effins, and we learn that they're moderately annoying, but not particularly dangerous. These are nothing like trombetes. And hey, would you look at that? They see a non-seb right after. It's a weird little tree that walks along the ground on its roots. It'll latch onto a healthier tree and plant its seeds in the tree, sucking it dry and walking out of its peeled bark. To harvest them, commoners can do it pretty easily. Yeah, since they're only like knee-high. Just grab them and cut off their roots. While getting some, they hear something like scream singing off in the distance. And when they mention it to the old man, turns out that's the song of an effin. Apparently they scream at each other trying to outdo one another, or something like that. They're incredibly loud to the point that they're a huge nuisance. But as long as commoners have something to plug their ears with, they can cut them down too. Bridget and Daniel leap into action and take on a few of them, with Daniel wondering why he's not getting any stronger despite his mana still growing. And Rosemine poses a word problem to him that basically says he's not putting any more mana into his strikes. That's why he feels like he's not really getting stronger. After they gather, Rosemine wishes Lutz luck, and they leave for the temple the next morning. A day after getting back, she's in Ferdinand's chamber doing paperwork. Eckhart is now joining him in the temple, but rather than guarding, he's also doing paperwork. Rosemine asks why, and Ferdinand lays it out that Rosemine is so weak that she actually needs guards in the temple. She can collapse just by sitting there. Whereas Ferdinand is strong enough to fend off any would-be attacker who comes in. Eustace joins them later and immediately launches into asking to see the workshop and stuff, because he's annoying as shit. She's adamant about him not, but he doesn't really take the hint. Rosemine says he can't go in the orphanage or he'd just make Wilma's androphobia even worse, with the girls' building being off-limits period. So Eustace mentions that maybe if he dressed like a woman he could go in, and understand he's dead serious.
You don't know the half of how serious he is here. In fact, you won't know until part 4.
With her forbidding his entry into the orphanage, Ferdinand clears the room of everyone but them, and her guard knights to discuss the summer ingredient. They're going to Mount Lowenberg to gather the egg of a fey beast known as a Riesefalke. It's supposedly a bird that eases Leidenschaft's anger, making Rosemine think it must be pretty sacred, but no, it's just a fey beast. But what exactly do they mean by his anger? Well, as they describe when Eustace gathered too many eggs and forced Eckhart and Ferdinand to kill a bunch of fey beasts on that mountain, it suddenly exploded. Yeah, it's a fucking volcano. The birds absorb the fire elemental mana, and that's what keeps the volcano from erupting.
I like how that's an in-universe religious explanation for a natural phenomena using fantasy mechanics to do so. That's just clever writing.
So knowing what to do, 4 days later, they head out. Eustace isn't coming because he causes too many fucking problems, but they go to camp out near the mountain, sleeping in Rosemine's high beast to avoid what happened during spring, and are planning to harvest the egg when the sun is at its brightest. Or so they hope at least. They leave early in the morning by high beast, sneak through a crack in the mountain, and everyone puts a potion in their eyes to increase their dark vision by 60 feet. Now it reeks of sulfur in there, and they take numerous breaks along the way because it's fucking hot obviously, you're in a volcano, but when they find what they're looking for, a chamber with a hot spring in it where the bird lays its eggs, They start to go inside. Well, after the bird leaves, of course. However, on their way in, they're cut off by a big fire-spewing lizard thing that Ferdinand handles while Rosemine goes with Eckhart to gather the egg. Well, not before Ferdinand tosses him a bag of face stones first. Eckhart throws a few of them down into the hot spring, which cools it off enough to be like hot bath water, and he dunks Rosemine in for her to grab the egg. When they surface, she sees a little monkey-looking thing coming up to her, looking kinda cute. That is until it tries to pull a Zanse and snatch her egg. Eckhart pulls her away just in time, but when they look, there's a ton of these fucking monkey things coming. Now, they're not exactly dangerous, but they're plentiful and pretty damn handsy. As they try to escape the water, Daniel shouts that the Riza Falcon mother is back, and Rosemine sees a giant bird swooping down to attack her since she has its egg. But Eckhart's not a slouch like Eustace. He grabs one of the monkeys by Rosemine and throws it straight up at the bird. This dunks her back down in the hot spring and she gets some of this sulfury water in her nose. But no time to complain. They haul ass on out of there while the bird is going after all those damn monkeys since they swooped in to steal more eggs. And outside the chamber, Ferdinand is holding off like 5 of these lizard things. He's gonna cover the rear, so he tells them to go on ahead. They all bail, Ferdinand shows up a bit later, and they peace out of that mountain with the summer ingredients safely in their grasp. Rosemine pretty much crashes as soon as they get back to camp, with Ferdinand shoving a potion down her throat, making her eat some food, and tells her to catch a nap with her egg, since she has a fever and needs to rest anyway. Might as well fill it up with mana while she sleeps. When she wakes up the next morning, she has a blue face stone ready for her potion. Remember hand pumps? Well, it's time for the meeting about that. But Rosemine's hidden room situation is a bit of a mess, since Fran's her only attendant who knows about her commoner origins currently there, and he hates the orphanage director's chamber's hidden room. He puts her at ease though, asking if she can help him conquer his fears of that room, and offers to go inside. So Fran's a champ. When Benno arrives, he says that Zach finished a prototype of the hand pump. Not blueprints, but an actual finished prototype, and has it installed on their well already. That's great. Except there's a part that only Johan can make at the moment. But Rosemine lays out her plans to hand the schematics for these over to the guild to handle. Benno was annoyed briefly, thinking she's throwing profits away again, but she tells him that she needs a magic contract to get the fees for her and Zach. That sounds more like it, but Benno can't be the one to do the contract for her. Yeah, she's a noble and the Archduke approves these anyway. She needs to talk to Sylvester about getting a contract for these pumps to span the whole duchy, so it'll spread far and wide. She goes to Ferdinand to schedule a meeting with Sylvester, and he's annoyed that she didn't tell him about all this first. I mean, in her defense, she would've once she had the schematics, but they went ahead and rushed into the prototype phase. So before they show Sylvester, Ferdinand wants to see it firsthand. They tell Zach to bring the one they were making for Johan's shop over to the temple for a demonstration. Rosemine introduces her Gutenbergs to Ferdinand for the first time here, and he offers his sympathies. Upon seeing the pump though, he goes scientist mode and asks Zach a ton of questions on how it works. You know, since it's science and not magic and all, Zach doesn't really have the specifics, and tries to pawn it off on Rosemine to answer. The demonstration goes off without a hitch and they have Monica fill a bucket with ease, impressing Ferdinand and confirming that this is indeed something worth the contract. They schedule the meeting and put on a show for the commoners, where they make a grand entrance into Sylvester's office, say they have a gift, and Sylvester wants to see it in action. So they do the unthinkable and take the Archduke down to the basement, or the first floor depending on your perspective. They show him the pump and how easily it works, and orders the contract made with himself, Rosemine, Zach, and the Smithing Guild signing it. Now every pump's gonna have Zach and Rosemine's names engraved on it, mostly to ensure it followed the contract. With all that fun out of the way, it's time to set the stage for the climax of this part with some ominous shit. When Rosemine goes to Ferdinand's room at third bell for her usual paperwork, he throws her into the lecture room and has some questions. Like, why didn't she tell him that Georgine was coming? There was a lot going on at that point. You know, like Ferdinand's return to noble society, so she forgot to mention it. She tells him Sylvester saw her at the Archduke conference, and that's a huge red flag. Georgine was married off to Arnsbach as the third wife of the Archduke there, specifically so she'd have the least amount of political power. First wives are involved in politics, and to avoid drama, second and third aren't involved unless they're there supporting the first wife, and only if they're on good terms. If Georgine was there at the conference, that means she successfully supplanted the first wife of Ob Arnsbach, a greater duchy that holds more power than Ehrenfest. We're getting a better understanding of Arnsbach here, now that they've been mentioned in the story for multiple volumes now since like part 2. It's a large populous duchy that chose the winning side of the Civil War, so from Ehrenfest's understanding, they're in a pretty favorable position. We'll learn in part 4 that Arnsbach is not just in a tough spot,
But despite being loyal to the king and on the winning side of the Civil War, their duchy's on the verge of collapse due to how much they continuously bent over backwards to prove their loyalty. Way more so than any other greater duchy had to. If the people we met from Arnsbach weren't so cartoonishly evil, it'd be pretty easy to feel bad for them later on.
Since it's relevant, Rosamine brings up the previously thought love letters that she's been hiding, and Ferdinand scolds her for hiding evidence. That could have been used to wrap her up in Bezewant's crimes too if she wasn't careful. Rosamine asks if Ferdinand's ever met Georgine, and he says he saw her at his father's funeral, but he was attending as a priest, since he was already in the temple, so she wasn't introduced to him. That makes her pretty sad that Ferdinand didn't get to say goodbye to his father, but Ferdinand isn't too bothered. Rosamine, on the other hand, loses her shit for him, cries, and gets a hug, baffling Ferdinand why she's so upset since it's not even her problem. I love that her biggest pillar of support in this series completely lacks empathy. After she calms down over Ferdinand's sad life somewhat, he wraps up the conversation saying Georgine is trouble, at least according to Sylvester, so she would do well to avoid her during her stay. The plan is to greet her upon her arrival, hide in the temple until she's gone, and then say farewell. That's it. At the end of summer, Rosamine notices a gaggle of carriages going into the noble quarter and informs Ferdinand that Georgine has arrived. He confirms it too, saying he just got a message from Sylvester. In 2 days, they're going to hold a welcoming feast. So at the castle, Riarda gets Rosamine dressed to meet the first wife of a greater duchy, and applies a certain fashion accessory popular in Arnsbach. Yeah, it's a veil. Remember back when she wore one during Spring Prayer in Part 2 to hide her face from evil nobles? That fashion statement was popularized when Veronica's mother was married into the duchy from Arnsbach. She asks Riarda about Georgine. She has a bit of a sad look on her face, but ultimately says she's a hard worker. When they go to the feast, pretty much everyone is dressed in Arnsbach fashion. Women with veils and men with cloaks instead of capes. Once the archducal family is in position, Georgine enters and pretty much already has the air of someone super important. Just seeing her getting closer makes Rosamine tense up, which is really unfortunate. She and Wilfried are the unlucky ones to greet her first. They step up, and while it's not Rosamine's first time, it's probably Wilfried's first time giving a proper noble greeting rather than being greeted himself. Georgine comments how Wilfried looks like Sylvester, but while it comes off in a kind voice, Rosamine gets a pretty bad feeling about it, mostly because she knows a bit about this woman. Wilfried compliments her back, saying she's beautiful and looks a lot like his grandmother. Florencia and Sylvester step between the kids and Georgine to give their greetings. Ob Arnfest, being the Archduke of a middle-ranked duchy, has to kneel and greet the first wife of a greater duchy, which strokes Georgine's ego in a way that tells you that she'd have an erection if she was a man. Yeah, she definitely got off on that. After the greeting, she turns to Rosamine and asks if she's the High Bishop who informed her. Rosamine says she is, and Georgine bashes Sylvester pretty blatantly, calling him lazy and stupid for not informing her of Bezewant's death. She mentions how tough it must be being adopted by such a shitty father, but Rosamine says Sylvester let Ferdinand be her guardian to help her with all the work in the temple. That just sounds like he's abandoning his fatherly duties though, and Georgine says just that, after wondering if Sylvester also gave her an idiot to watch over her. Ferdinand inserts himself into the conversation at this point, wearing the most noble smile anyone has ever made in this series to this point. It looks like Wilma's rose-tinted version of Ferdinand came to life just for this meeting with how happy he looks. Rosamine picks up though that despite how radiant his smile is, he's definitely loathing this. We'll learn later that this is probably something drilled into him by Veronica, or maybe a coping mechanism. Anytime Ferdinand needs to meet with a woman who looks like Veronica, he wears a radiant smile that not even nobles can tell isn't genuine. It also usually means he's extremely miserable. With the whole family greeted, Georgine mingles with a ton of nobles flocking to her. It's here we see she's a complete natural when it comes to socializing. Back at the temple, shit has pretty much gone down. Rosamine's locked away there to ensure no information is leaked, or that her weaknesses aren't learned of, so she can't summon the Gilberta or Planting companies. Not that it's too bad since she can just read in the book room and get some work done, but one day Fritz comes and informs her that Dirk is bubbling again. Yeah, it's been over a year since he was sucked dry by Bezewanst, so his man is finally starting to overflow again. She sets up an emergency meeting with Ferdinand and goes to his chambers later just in time to see Eckhart leave. Ferdinand has him and Eustace in gathering mode, so they're getting a ton of information. They're off running pretty much everywhere. But about Dirk, Rosamine gets the room cleared and says the kid's mana is overflowing. He can't leave the orphanage to offer mana, but that's what face stones are for. Ferdinand slides one over and it ends up with Fran. The real question is, was his contract with Bindewald nullified? And no, it hasn't been. The reason being, Dirk would be more susceptible to being taken if he wasn't under contract, because as we've already seen, no one really wants to claim a criminal's property. However, Georgine being there is another story. She could claim the child as Arnsbach property and could take him out of the duchy with her. Rosemine wonders if she would actually do all that for a devouring child. And if it hurts Sylvester's newest family member, and by proxy Sylvester himself, you bet your ass she would. Especially since Georgine has learned who got Bezewants killed by now from the former Veronica faction. In fact, Sheik's mother has been bitching endlessly about Rosemine to Georgine, so the only option is really to sign Dirk over to Rosemine. But doing so means he's gonna have a guardian, so he couldn't live in the orphanage anymore. Not to mention she doesn't really have the ability to care for a child at the moment. When Rosemine asks if there's a way around that, Ferdinand says there isn't, but then again, someone found a convenient way just last year. They're borrowing a page from Sylvester and giving a contract to someone in the orphanage to press Dirk's blood against if he's in danger. That way he'll be signed over to Rosemine and she can protect him. So who can they trust? An obligatory fuck Delia. They go to the orphanage with the face stone, Delia shelters Dirk, scared of what happened last time when he was drained, and they let her actually do it herself to ease her worries. Then they hand her the contract and explain it's only for emergencies when Dirk is in danger. And that's the loose ends tied up for now.
Well, that's pretty much Delia's exit from the story for a long while. She'll make like a minor appearance in part 4, but that's more just to check in on how she's doing. But all I can say is she won't be missed.
They finally got word that Georgine is leaving and start heading to the castle. Bridget got a message from her brother saying they invented some new paper and are giving it to Rosemine to give to her Gutenbergs in the lower city to run some ink tests on. They go to a waiting room until it's time to see Georgine off, and Rosemine sees Ferdinand there working. She mentions her package and Ferdinand takes her to the mailroom, which is where important boxes are sent via magic circle to the castle. And yeah, that can happen outside the Harvest Festival. One's there for Rosemine from Ilkner, and after she signs for it, she sees some new paper inside. One's pretty firm and doesn't break when folded, meaning it's probably pretty good for playing cards. But in the meantime, she folds it into a large paper fan, typical of a Japanese comedy prop used to smack idiots with. Ferdinand asks her what the hell that is, so she tries to show him with the thwack, only to get thwacked herself. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't thwack unless you want to be thwacked yourself. Since Ferdinand won't give her Hardison back until they're at the temple, she has to work with him while they wait. Wilfried shows up and practices the farewell he's supposed to say, which amounts to praying that the god of time weaves their threads together. Or some shit, which is basically a polite way of saying goodbye, but you don't expect to see the person anytime soon. So they go to deliver that goodbye, and after everyone does, Wilfried fucks up. He blurts out that he barely got to talk to Georgine at all, and wishes to see her again. She suggests next summer, and he says that's a good idea. She then looks to Sylvester, asking if she can take that invitation, and since it was already offered, they can't really go back on it now. Once Georgine is out of sight, Ferdinand hands Rosemine the Hardison, and she gives Wilfried a well-deserved smack on the head. After she yells at him a bunch, they go inside, and Wilfried still doesn't understand what he did wrong. Sylvester lays it out. They don't want an outside Archduke's wife sniffing around and causing problems. Yeah, even if she's family. If he can't behave before someone of higher status, they'll have to train him some more. Bonifacius comes to mind, but Wilfried already treats him with respect. Rosemine suggests Ferdinand, but Wilfried says his grandmother told him he didn't have to. She snaps back that Veronica's been in prison for a whole year. What she said is pretty much out the window at this point, and everyone winces because Wilfried wasn't told that Veronica was in jail. Yeah, they were kinda hoping to put that off until things calmed down somewhat, like maybe before he goes to the academy or something. But Rosemine's not okay with that. She hates Veronica for being the reason she can't see her lower city family anymore. Honestly, it all kinda goes back to her. But on top of that, Ferdinand is still a member of the archducal family, whether Wilfried likes it or not, so he needs to start treating him with some respect. Good thing is Sylvester backs her up here. Since Ferdinand isn't a blue priest anymore, Wilfried does need to start giving him respect. And when they ask Rosemine to help educate him with this, she brushes it off saying she's too busy. Georgine's visit put a damper on her plans for a while. She needs to get moving again. Once they're back in the temple, Rosemine says she wants to send priests to Haas to teach them to read and write. Her excuse is she got a letter requesting she buy some orphans to help them with their winter prep. It'll also help them make up for the lower harvest they're anticipating. The letter in question wasn't appropriate for a little girl to read, as the euphemisms used translated to, "We'll give you booze and bitches if you give us favors." Which, that's a pretty Bezewants letter to get. So yeah, it doesn't take long for Rosemine to forget about Georgine entirely now that she's out of the duchy. In the epilogue though, we see the sinister group of nobles we've been previously introduced to. Sheik's mom is leaving the noble quarter on her way back to her husband's domain, after spending the whole trip bashing Rosemine to Georgine. We learn a bit more about why she's so bitter. It's not just that her son was executed for a blunder that pissed her off, so she's blaming the other party involved. That ruined her entire life's worth of planning basically. When her son was born, he had shit mana, so he ended up in the temple because she didn't want to make him into a servant or have him adopted by a lay noble. She used him to get in with Bezewans. That way her province could get better treatment for Spring Prayer, as well as make connections to Veronica. That way her son would still be useful. Then when Shiksa was allowed to join noble society, everything changed. She jumped into action right away, planning to get her husband's son from a previous wife disinherited, and have Shiksa become the new Geeb. Then he fucked up and got killed for it, instead of the commoner being the one who got killed. So yeah, in her eyes, Sylvester's a pretty shit archduke, and Georgine would have been better for the role. She gets a message on her way back that Geeb Gerlach is hosting some like-minded nobles to discuss Georgine's parting message, the one she sent before leaving the duchy. So she takes off on Highbeast and learns that Georgine has found a path to the Foundation. The nobles there are pretty influential in the Veronica faction. They're planning to pretty much reformat it into a Georgine faction. That way they can support her in her takeover of Ehrenfest, as they believe she rightfully should. But Georgine's pretty cautious, so they'll have to signal that they're ready for her to make her move. How? By messing with Sylvester and trying to destabilize the duchy as much as possible, planning on using Wilfried like the tool he is. And once Sylvester is out of power, they're planning to ruin Rosemine's life. In a ton of unspeakable ways, to be honest.
So that's our volume's main storyline. The side stories aren't exactly earth-shattering this time around, comparatively speaking, since last volume had some huge backstory and lore reveals. Let's take a look regardless.
Starting things off with Tea Party from Florencia's perspective. She's due to have a tea party with Georgine in a more private setting than the feast, but before that she sees off her other children, and remembers how she couldn't see Wilfried's cute smile as she would leave because of Veronica. We see here how grateful she is to Rosemine, for not just saving Wilfried, but imprisoning Veronica too. The reason Florencia hates her so much is Veronica antagonized her for getting in the way of her plans. Sylvester was supposed to have a first wife from Arnsbach, not Frembeltag. At the tea party, they're doing their best to hide Rosemine's inventions, like sweets for example, so they don't reveal the huge revolution happening in their duchy. When Georgine arrives, they break it to her that Bezewans doesn't have a grave, because he was executed as a criminal, and Guy Groschel didn't accept Bezewans as a member of their family. He explains what happened, omitting that the noble he and Veronica let in was from her duchy. After hearing the circumstances though, she accepts the reasoning, and asks if she can take a keepsake from his belongings, which Sylvester still has. He also returns the letters Georgine sent to Bezewans, stating that he clearly treasured them. She then asks if she can be taken to Veronica to see her, but there's going to be some conditions. And Sylvester is making some major concessions here, but she's going to be wearing a stop-sealing magic tool and can't speak to her. When they go to the Ivory Tower, a location where the archducal family members are held on crimes, Veronica yells to Georgine to talk some sense into Sylvester, but Georgine keeps her promise. She plays this as wanting to see her mother is okay, but Florencia notices the smile she gave wasn't one of relief, but is absolutely terrifying as she looks back at Veronica. It's pretty easy to speculate that, hey, since Georgine is pissed off Sylvester took her place and Veronica's the one who doted on him so much, maybe she's pretty happy to see her mama suffering. After that, Florencia meets with Elvira, and they talk about what Georgine's doing, basically meeting with the former Veronica faction, and getting all the info on what happened from them. They're aware this is also reinvigorating the dwindling faction, keeping it alive to cause problems. On top of that, they can't really picture Georgine not directing her anger at Rosemine. Florencia asks Elvira what Georgine was like at the academy, since she actually attended with Sylvester's younger older sister Constanza, who doted on her after she became romantically involved with Florencia's older brother. Elvira confirms what we already know. She put Sylvester through hell. Since Georgine didn't return to Ehrenfest once while she was the third wife, now that she has power, coming back can mean nothing good. Now cut to when Georgine leaves, and we can see Florencia is struggling to keep herself from telling her to fuck right off. But obviously she can't say that, so when Rosemine smacks Wilfried at the end of the visit, she's cheering her on in her head, while also seriously considering having the two of them marry to stabilize their duchy. Next is Damiel's proposal from the Starbind. Right after Rosemine left, Bridget is sticking with Elvira since she's helming the dress debut for Rosemine due to the latter's age. Before the festivities kick off, Sylvester announces Ferdinand's return, and we see the immediate impact on the factions, as it boosts Florencia's and hurts Veronica's by ignoring what she wanted. That means all eyes are now on Bridget, since Rosemine is a key member of Florencia's faction, but the voice that calls out to her first is one she recognizes, and it's not pleasant. Yeah, it's her former fiancé, Asheit, and he's asking Elvira if he can speak to Bridget. Elvira gives a euphemistic answer saying he can with her watching, and so is Guy Bilgner from the crowd. The conversation that follows is veiled in religious euphemisms, but it boils down to publicly saying that it sucks that their marriage is called off, and to restore her honor, he'd be willing to get engaged again. Yeah, that's the plain text words, but the meaning is much more sinister. Since this asshole's plan was to get rid of Bridget's brother so he could be the next Geeb, and the implications are she's damaged goods, and no one's ever gonna want her. Yeah, this pisses Bridget off, but Elvira's a strong calming force, in pretty much the same way Ferdinand is. So, she makes Bridget act like a noble here. He professes his love again, but all this really does is put her in a bad position. She either accepts his proposal, restoring her public image, but dooms her family and hurts Rosemine in the process. Not on Elvira's watch. Or she could turn him down and further damage her honor. He's masking this by drawing parallels between him as the god of life and her as the god of earth, which is scarily apt in this case. But another voice calls out to interrupt, saying Awigalib isn't the only one who yearns for Geduld. Daniel's friends appear, mocking Hassite, and say there's more people who find Bridget attractive than just him. They shove Daniel to the forefront and he drops to his knee and proposes right there. Well, not on the spot, I guess, but says to give him a year so he can make his mana capacity match hers, or she doesn't have to refuse his proposal publicly or right now, and also, like, she's not expecting him to have the mana, so that's a valid reason to call off a marriage. So, ultimately, this spares her honor. She tells Hassite to fuck off and says Daniel made her happy, and looks forward to next year, and then gets permission from Elvira to go see her brother with Daniel. But we can see a distinct sparkle in Elvira's eyes as she sees them off. That'll be more relevant later. Now when they're in Ilgner, Daniel steps out late one night, and Bridget's informed he snuck out. She decides to chase after him on Highbeast, and the two meet up. Where, when asked, Daniel was planning to put Rosemine's combat advice into practice. Bridget notes that his mana has indeed grown, and that's when Daniel lets her in on his little secret. Yeah, that he's still in his growth period. She's a little stunned, asking if he really intends to match her mana by next year, and Daniel is serious. So he proposes yet again, this time without the audience, so she knows it's for real. But before she accepts, she instead asks Daniel what he thinks of Ilgner. He says it's a great place and the people are nice, and he likes how comfortable Bridget is here. So with that, she responds favorably to his proposal, assuming he meant that he would move to Ilgner when they get married. Lastly, we have staying in Ilgner with Lutz, Gil, and Damien during their papermaking. Most of this is culture shock on everyone's part, where Damien's having an extra tough time adjusting, since he's so rich he never has to do manual labor. Also, he can't find a servant here since Ilgner's so far out in the sticks. People generally barter, as money has little value, so he's stuck gathering food for his turn doing so, while Lutz, Gil, and the Grey Robes are off to make paper. Enter Karya, Geeb Ilgner's servant, which sounds super fancy, but she's like pretty much every other commoner you'll see, due to how lax Ilgner is, though she's functioning as a vital line of communication between the Geeb Planting Company and the town. They're testing some new stuff exclusive to Ilgner, like a new sticky thing that ends up making the paper dry a lot quicker, but depending on how much is used, causes it to shrink and become too hard. They're not sure if it'll be good for books, but there's a great chance they just stumbled on a key export for Ilgner, and decided to ship this stuff off to Rosemine.
And it's done. Made our way through the content here. And while it gives some more context on the romance between Bridget and Daniel, as well as checking in on the Ilgner crew, the more interesting stuff is honestly the backstory with Florencia and the ruling class of nobles. But then again, a lot of this is stuff we are either already privy to, or will learn more about later. I am getting a bit ahead of myself though, so let's wrap this volume up with my thoughts.
The first half of this volume really felt like maintenance on the background plot threads in this part. We see a ton with the craftsman, Thule growing up, Benno's transition to the new store, the printing press finally being completed and tested, you know, stuff like that. That's fine and builds the world, but certainly front-loaded, leaving this book in particular with a meandering pace that hits its stride about halfway through as the Starbind approaches, Rosemine's ingredient comes into play, and ends on some really strong lore with Sylvester and Georgine. How that builds on not just the sprawling family that connects the neighboring duchies by blood, but also how these dynamics apply to other archdukes as well. I want to talk about how archdukes and archduchesses are handled in this series. The rulers seem to be almost exclusively male, and that seems a little out of place considering how much of a matriarchy this society is. Women have the largest influence over mana of a child, women are the major political actors behind the scenes in noble society, and are also the best political bargaining chips for marriage. They sit in a unique position, where they have a great deal of say in their marriages despite having multiple wives per husband. But we learn that an archduchess isn't exactly desirable, and Georgine was snubbed by Sylvester, throwing away a politically connected, intelligent, well-liked heir for a male who, by all accounts, was a buffoon and puppet to his mother and Bezewanst. That comes off as odd in retrospect, where women are getting snubbed for leadership positions in this world, where they're so obviously important and prioritized in other aspects. And the reason isn't something we learn until part 4, but it's not really spoilers, so I'll just say it here. It has everything to do with pregnancy. An Archduchess needs to provide mana to the duchy like an Archduke does, but while pregnant, the developing fetus requires a steady source of mana. That's to ensure it has high mana itself, though conversely too much can lead to a miscarriage, meaning a pregnant Archduchess would struggle to provide enough mana to either the land or the child, and that's why women aren't prioritized for ruling roles. Hell, it even explains why women are expected to step down as retainers when they get married, because they're not going to be able to dedicate their mana to their master's needs, while also providing mana for a possible child, on top of all the other health risks obviously. It's a pretty elegant answer that explains why women are so influential in this world, while also not holding positions of power, at least not center stage positions, as the first wife of an Archduke wields plenty of power herself. It also explains why Georgine is so bitter about losing her position as Baronfest. In short, pregnancy is a complicated affair in this world, and it's one of the major factors playing into women's roles in society, including the selection process. Yeah, a bit of a minor point I didn't bring up in the plot synopsis, but we learn in Rosemine's history lessons that Sylvester is the 7th generation Archduke of Baronfest. His family has about 200 years of history in this duchy, and in part 4 that's pretty relevant, because Baronfest is looked down upon for being a young duchy without many traditions. On top of that, it's mentioned that the Archduke's family expanded the city after they won a war. Knowing what we know about how duchies are taken over, it's pretty neat hearing more about how the Ehrenfest line came into power. One thing I will say that pulls me out of this story on occasion is how fiercely single-minded some of the side characters are. I guess Angelica's combat focus makes sense because that head can maybe fit only one personality trait in it, but Bridget's not exactly exempt from comments like that either. The always framing situations around possible combat trope for knights stands out every time it's mentioned. Ehrenfest is pretty peaceful, and as we know, Bridget's training in the Royal Academy had to be a complete train wreck from how the knights act in part 4, so I can't imagine her being so hyper-focused. I guess it just bothers me, because I know for a fact she's deeper than always thinking about combat from her characterization, so when it's framed that way, it feels kinda weird. Ilgnir's been talked about in the background for 4 volumes now, and seeing it now, I understand why Bridget is so devoted. Most nobles view commoners as beneath them, but because of the culture in that province, we see Bridget has a special relationship with her people. The commoners and nobility work together to ensure a good harvest, keep their settlement safe, and have a close bond akin to extended family. That's something so foreign to the nobility in this franchise, so getting to see it makes me recognize why Bridget would do anything for Ilgnir. In her eyes, the commoners aren't able to use magic, nor had the political influence to protect themselves, so she has to be the one to do it for them. Not out of a sense of obligation, but because she knows these people. She grew up with them, hunted, played, and even shared a table. That's so thematically relevant to why Rosemine and Bridget just click, since they both have a close familial connection to commoners. I mentioned in volume 1 of this part that I like Bridget, and specifically the chapter Ilgnir's Bridget is why. It's easy to write someone like her off early on as being super dedicated to her land because she's a proper knight or whatever, and then you find out later it's not for some cliched reason like honor she's so invested in her home province. It's more personal and tangible, and when it comes to work or living in the noble quarter, choosing Ilgnir is an absolute no-brainer in her eyes, because honestly that's where her heart is. The summer ingredient gathering is one of the more interesting ones, as it's built up to be pretty dangerous, goes by incredibly fast, and entirely as planned. But while that might seem kinda disappointing, it's more testament to how much Ferdinand prepared for this. This also wasn't a blind gathering, as he had done this before with Eckhart and Eustace. I would also like to point out that this is the only gathering where Rosemine actually had any damage. Yeah, she got some sulfur water in her nose, and it led to some mild discomfort, but despite how it went off without a hitch, she still had something resembling damage during this, while the rest are full of unexpected surprises that were handled expertly. I think that goes to show that sometimes the worst danger is the one you know. But really, I think this is probably the one they were most worried about, and Ferdinand had a strong strategy to account for any mishaps. I think it also helps in the grand scheme of things. Each ingredient has presented their own dangers to differentiate themselves, with whimsical fantasy that could have gone horribly wrong, a race against the clock with swarming monsters, a battle of attrition, and a stealthy infiltration. Since each is so different, it's been a lot more than a checklist, and I definitely appreciate the variety.
So that's it. We just wrapped up the penultimate volume in part 3, where Rosemine's almost done with her gathering, but more ominous storm clouds are gathering on the horizon. Something tells me that her once peaceful noble life is about to come to a shattering end, especially as she's about to correct her mistake from the previous fall, as well as meet her newly baptized sister Charlotte. But for now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description. If you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to HonorWolf01 and RobinDBL for their continued support. Thanks for watching.